Okay, everyone, we are going to get going with this session, which I'm really looking forward to. We've got a couple of presenters giving us some insights into student engagement activity. So I don't know anything about their work, so I'm really excited to hear more about what they're doing. We'll do a 20-minute presentation and then do some questions for Daisy, and then we'll move on to Rachel, hopefully later. So we will, we'll move on to Rachel after that. I'll hand over to Daisy and let her get going.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Daisy, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. It's really, really great to be here with you to present part of my preliminary findings at the current stage. I saw some of the familiar faces, I feel like. So it's nice to be here and surrounded the companions here. And so my research is Today, my presentation is based on the staff interviews with 15 scheme leaders in 10 universities in the UK. And before I started to share my findings, I would like to lay a little bit of background for myself because some of you may not know me. So I'm Daisy, and I'm a PhD student. As you can see, I'm international students and underrepresented students. I'm first generation university students. Before I came to Edinburgh, I feel like it's incredible for me to be talking to foreigners with different faces. It's really, really like something happened in my dream, or the high school textbook, we have English book, so with different foreigners on the book. So it's incredible for me with this experience. And it's quite challenging also for me to present or speaking in public with English. And if you can imagine, I also spend like 1 or 2 hours every day to studying English, which is very surprising for some of my PhD colleagues. They think, wow, you need to spend extra time on other things, not your academic research. So if you know, Chinese is the hardest language in the world, right? You can imagine maybe it's the hardest language for us to learn English. Yes. So I'm really thank you for coming to my session, and please bear with me if my pronunciation is not clear to you. You can just ask me after my session. I'm happy to answer any questions and any discussion, any ideas. So this is a little brief introduction for myself. And today I'm going to talk about the findings from the staff interviews who are overseeing the institutional schemes focusing on student-staff partnership research in research activities. Before I sharing my findings, I would like to invite you to reflect on your roles. So how many of you here are currently leading or maybe previously led an institutional scheme in relation to student partnership, co-creation, or student experiences? Oh, good, a lot. Yeah, wow. So we got a lot of expertise here, and we have a good mixture. I feel like we have a good mixture of colleagues here. Thank you very much for raising your hands. And if you have any question or any ideas during my presentation, please feel free to discuss. So here, as you can see, this figure represents my preliminary findings from staff interviews, leader interviews. You can notice, actually, I didn't make it as bullets. I purposely do that because I want to illustrate the the map the findings and showing the relationship between different findings for you. And before I expand the findings, I would like to lay a little bit background of my research and my big research. So my doctoral research focuses on student-staff partnership, which is students are supported to lead change in learning and teaching through partnership, which is researching collaboratively with the staff members. And this is becoming a strategy at institutional and discipline levels in many universities in the UK. So you can see such partnership value is embedded in different and various practical schemes in universities. For example, here you can see change makers in UCL and Kingston, and students as producers in Lincoln. If you joined the RACE conference last year, they introduced a lot about their students as producers. And also co-creators in Westminster. And student partners in Hertfordshire and Edinburgh University. So all of these practical schemes underpin the student-staff partnership in research. And although these experiences, partnership experiences, were suggested not only enlighten the next generation of researchers, but also develop skills that integral to careers in many other industries. So partnership sounds like very aspirational, right? But it still faces vagueness and conflicts because of its wide but uncritical use in different contexts of higher education. So my doctoral research focuses on, aims to explore the student-staff partnership in research activities that universities try to set up. So here the research activity has a broader definition, including inquiry activity and investigation elements. And also explore the practices and perspectives of different stakeholders, including students, staff, and project leaders or scheme leaders. So you can see scheme leaders are part of my research. But why? Why we want to explore their perspectives? This is because some researchers suggested the individual, including students and staff, their capacity of conducting partnership is largely be influenced by the institutional contexts supported such partnership. So in order to understand or deeply understand the context, the different contexts of institutions, we need to find some insiders, because I'm outsider, right? I don't know their kind of a context very well. So we need to find some insiders. Then the project leader or the scheme leader can be the #1 choice because they have concrete and solid knowledge of institutional functionality. So that's why leader can be the data resource. And so in order to explore the questions and the research aims, the leader interview is conducted through 3 phases, as you can see here. Oh, sorry, I covered that. 3 phases. So the first one is online systematic searching. So based on the online searching criteria, I filtered 16 universities with 18 schemes from 165 universities in the UK. And after inviting the leaders, finally I got 15 leaders in 10 universities to be interviewed during October 2022 and March 2023. And based on the interview data, I used thematic analysis to conclude some findings, as you can see here. And 3 main themes is emerged from the data. As you can see, it's related to the purpose and the decision making. Okay, so I'm going to show this figure again. So it's related to the purpose and the institutional support, and also the loyalty to the job responsibility. It's a little bit abstract, I know. So I will expand the findings later. But before I expand the finding, I would like to invite you to voice your opinions in terms of what is partnership from your perspective. Some of you may not familiar with the partnership in research, but you probably heard about the partnership. So I provide 3 pictures here. I'm not sure if the back, can you see it at the very back? Okay, great. Thank you for the thumb. Yeah. Okay, so you can see 3 pictures here. Do you feel like this picture can represent your idea of partnership? If not, maybe you can draw something with yourself. I didn't expect the avenue is so huge, so I prepared some cards for you if you would like to draw. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So you can choose each of the picture to represent your ideas of partnership, or if you feel like, oh no, my idea is quite different from this, you can also draw by yourself anything you think about what is partnership for you. So we can have several minutes to do this. If you choose one of them, you can just write 1 or 2 or 3 as a number.
I'm just conscious of time, so do you need these back to do your next bit?
No, I don't. Yeah. What time is the?
You should be finishing about 1/4 past. Yeah.
1/4.
I'll just say.
Okay.
If you want to do what you're doing, and I'll collect them back in, but let Daisy get on with the rest of the presentation while you're doing that, okay?
Yeah. So if you finish, does anyone want to share your ideas in terms of what is partnership? Number 1. Yeah. Could you, share your idea?
So that's what I relate to, aesthetic collaboration, partnerships, and getting ready to.
Great, yes. So you must have a good relationship with the students, yeah. Sitting together, collaborative, and talking about. Yeah, is that okay?
Number 3.
Yeah.
So working together.
Mm-hmm.
Working together collaboratively, and you need to form a plan in order to be able to work for number 3, but you need to be able to actually implement it together as partners.
Yeah, that's very interesting idea. Okay.
I would echo number 3 as there's no power dynamic, right? There's no leader telling the other person what to do, right? It's equal and
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I agree with you. Kind of a very equal and without any leading something like, right. Yeah, thank you.
I would just say number 3 as well, simply because they're actually seeing something, so they're seeing the results of the collaboration.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. The results, you mean the tree, right? Great. Probably the tree is quite different from different projects.
Can we just wait for the microphone to get to you so the online delegates can hear what you're saying as well, please? Thank you.
I think, Daisy, it's 1 + 2 + 3. So I think 1 is us sitting down collectively defining the problem, 2 is us working out the methodology, and 3 is us actually doing the research. So I think all of your images combine to form partnership.
That's good. Yes, I love your idea. Kind of, so you see, actually, all of you have very different ideas in terms of what is partnership, right? So across my research, people provide different perspectives in terms of what is partnership in their mind. So here is the 3 main preliminary findings from leader interviews. And if you want to share your ideas later, you can kind of talk with me, and I'm really happy to develop my ideas. Okay, so the first part is the purpose, related to the purpose. You see, different universities, they adopted different approaches to conduct partnerships in their institutions. So some of the leaders, they took the responsibility of identifying the priorities of partnership in their institution. And this is a quite central governing. But different from such a central governing type, some universities, they trying to be very open to the topics of funded projects. So the projects are not necessarily to be in higher education area. It can be anything. For example, the children's book or something others. And in the meantime, some universities, they are trying to relinquish part of the power of identifying the priorities of partnership to their participants by consulting the students and the staff networks. So including student reps, student forum, SSLC, and maybe the dean of learning and teaching. So based on the feedback from students and the staff groups, they set up the priorities of partnership projects. And so this led to a question. So why some universities, they choose very direction type, and some universities, they choose a negotiation type. So this is, interestingly, from the data, it's quite closely related to the diverse purpose, implicitly purpose of conducting partnership in their institutions. This can be very various, including improving learning quality to producing research innovation. And a very interesting thing is, the more the partnership scheme focusing on student personal development, the stronger the influence of delegation type can make the influence. So this is about the purpose. Because of the time, so I very quick introduce my findings. I'm sorry about the very brief introduction. And so, apart from the very implicit purpose, let's move to a practical level, which is how institutions support partnership projects. So you can see most schemes, they have the introduction meeting for partnership projects and application, but on kind of a 2/3 schemes, they actually didn't have any training or workshops throughout the projects. And only 3 schemes, they require their participants and projects constantly reflect on partnership process. What does this figure mean? So this figure indicated actually the partnership relationship was more likely to assessed and maybe identified through the application process. So it's quite unclear for institutions to understand how partnership or whether partnership is genuinely work throughout the whole process. So this, for linking to my another interview, kind of a student and a staff interview data, some students and staff explicitly identified that they are now doing partnership. And some students also say, okay, I don't know what is partnership. So these kind of figures actually remind us a question. Do we need to know how partnership works during their project process? If so, what is the better timing to assess? So actually, the leaders, they all perceived power imbalance and responsibility and engagement are quite dynamic by project. So they identified that there's no one-size-fits-all model for all the team. So in that case, we need to think about, in that case, maybe ongoing support and workshops and training can be very valuable for different projects, rather than just check out the outputs or maybe the last results at the end of their project. So the last one will be related to a question, lead to a question. So who decided the purpose and institutional supports? And how the leaders make their decision? And this is a very interesting topic about the loyalty to their job and responsibility. And you can see Harren made a very interesting discussion in terms of how decision mechanism was made. And so, in relation to the job responsibility, the staff members, the leaders have a tendency to maintain their job responsibility and kind of a loyalty to their job responsibility through their job. And such loyalty also influences their understanding of partnership. Usually, this will be related to the institutional value, including the institutional strategies and the policies. So you can see such loyalty will influence their ideal understanding, which is totally out of their interest, and also the ought-to understanding, which is influenced by their work positions. So this is about the understanding, and because of time, so this is a preliminary finding that I concluded from the project leader interviews. And I'm going to end with one of the quotations from my participants. So they are quite surprising by how important and how valuable that partnership in research can provide for students and maybe for staff members in terms of engaging students and achieve their success in higher education. So the last picture. So I'm Daisy, as I introduced, and I'm a very tiny type of a flower, but I feel like I was surrounded by all of you who have the same interests in supporting students' learning. And so, although each of us are very tiny and have limited influence, but all of us together, I think we can make the higher education more beautiful. Yeah. So that's what I want to share with you. Sorry, I'm quite rushed because of the time. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you very much, Daisy, for that presentation. It was amazing. Loved the way you shared lots of your own personal insights as well as the findings from the research as well. And we'll have a look at some more of that with you at another date. I think what we'll do is we'll move on to Rachel's presentation and take questions at the end, just to make sure you all get away for lunch. It was very early lunch, but yeah. So I'll move over to Rachel, and then we'll take some questions at the end, if that's okay.
Hi everyone, I'm like walking across a wooden stage wearing wooden clogs, like trying to creep carefully. Hello everybody, thank you for coming to listen, and thanks Daisy for that presentation. It was really interesting and insightful, and I think hopefully what I'm going to talk about leads on really nicely from that, because my project is this is kind of exploring what you might call a grassroots project, I guess, but one which has then had institutional level influence. I think what happens at institutional level is obviously very important, but I am also a very firm believer that things that happen at the grassroots level also have a lot of potential when they are done well. And done in a way that truly engages students as partners, can have that ripple wider effect across the university, but also across the sector. So I'm, like Daisy, going to tell you a little bit about me, because obviously the conference theme and the enhancement theme is around resilient learning communities. So the communities that I am part of are absolutely essential to everything I do in my personal life, but for the purposes of today, particularly what I do at the University of Leeds, where I'm based in the School of Law. So I come from a lovely place called Hull in England. I just keep remembering I'm in a different country and say in England. And I come from a working class background. I'm first in my family to go to university, and I did actually go to the University of Leeds. I came with my mum and dad to look at Glasgow and loved it, but ultimately felt too scared to move that far away from home. And it's one of those things I always wonder, if I had come to Glasgow, what would my life be now? But at least I'm here now. I stumbled relatively blindly into a corporate legal career, and I worked at an international law firm for a few years as a corporate tax solicitor, until I discovered that that life very much was not the life that I had intended for myself. And then I found my way back into academia as a lecturer in the School of Law at Leeds, and I'm now an associate professor. I am currently, but not for much longer, sadly, because it's time for me to step down, but I'm currently the Director of Student Support and Academic Personal Tutoring Lead in my school, which kind of, a lot of that work a lot of the work I'm going to talk about today in terms of my research stems from things that I've done in that role. My key communities that I think make me who I am, I'm not a huge fan of the word resilient, but you might say who make me resilient. My CrossFit community, my musical theatre community, and then I've also got a picture of my dog Rudy on the end there, just because he has to appear in everything that I do, because he is the light of my life. But also, I'm a vegan. I'm very passionate about environmental and animal rights issues, so he kind of represents that as well, and that community that I am part of. And as I say, these are things that are fundamental to me, my background, my identity, the communities that I'm part of, and thinking about how these communities have really transformed me as a person. And the work that I do with students is really centered around that, because I want to do things that might facilitate them to have the opportunity to think about who they are and what they want from their lives and what they value and what they want to do and achieve. And that's something that I've tried to create through this project. So I'm going to say a little bit about reverse mentoring, although the presentation today is really about the co-design of a reverse mentoring scheme, so it isn't as central. But does Would you mind raising your hands if you know what reverse mentoring is or you've been involved in it yourselves or seen schemes? Okay, few hands. Okay, so it's worth me explaining. So reverse mentoring, my sort of research interest in this stemmed from my time in legal practice, where I saw it being used as a diversity and inclusion tool. In the firm that I worked at, it was to try and get more female lawyers into kind of senior partnership level roles within the law firm that I worked at. And it kind of does what it says on the tin. If I think about an example of when I've been mentored, when I was a law student, I got mentored by a solicitor who was practicing in Leeds, and that person supported me with my journey towards becoming a solicitor. So in reverse mentoring, there's what we might think of as more traditional mentoring roles are reversed, and it would put someone like me, the student as I was then, into the role of mentor, mentoring the person who is within the legal profession, let's say about my lived experiences as someone coming from a working class background who's trying to break into a very elitist and often very classist profession. So supporting that person to understand what that experience is like, how they might adapt, change, improve their processes in order to make, in that example, the legal profession more inclusive. So in my project that I'm going to talk about today, it's using reverse mentoring in the higher education context. So again, we might expect a staff member to mentor a student throughout their time in education, but this is about students mentoring staff around their lived experiences and recognising those lived experiences of our students as expert knowledge. Whilst we might think that we know a lot more than our students from a sort of discipline and content perspective, and that's right, we're teaching and supporting and educating them, there is nobody that knows their life experiences and their identities better than them. And of course, we know our students' identities have a huge impact on their university experiences. So I've got this little plug there for a paper that I've written. It is in a legal education journal, but it's freely accessible if anyone wants to read it. That was about my first pilot project in 2019-20, that wonderful year. So if you would like to read that, please have a look. But this is just really to summarise some of the things that came out of that pilot project. It was the first sort of empirical, qualitatively analysed reverse mentoring study in higher education, looking at diversity and inclusion issues. So it saw international undergraduate students mentoring members of academic and support staff on a range of issues. That we looked at things like failure and resilience, belonging, labelling and identity, inclusive teaching practice, among other things, throughout the kind of scheme of mentoring meetings. And some of the things that came out of that, it was a feasibility study, I guess. Is reverse mentoring something that is good in higher education and something that we should be doing more of? So some of the things that came out of it were that actually, although I was calling it, and still do call it reverse mentoring, it was actually very much of reciprocal benefit. The students and the staff both had transformational opportunities through these very unique conversations that they were having because of this intentional disruption of traditional hierarchies in higher education. They got to talk about things they otherwise wouldn't have done. They got to challenge things that staff and students often might not get to talk about together. This was empowering and ultimately humanized staff and students to one another. And I always sometimes think that sounds a bit daft to say, staff and students don't view each other as human. But in the 4 years that I've been doing this reverse mentoring research, it keeps coming out as a recurring theme that these conversations, reverse mentoring conversations, are breaking down barriers and hierarchies and creating this humanizing effect that otherwise often isn't there. So as I said, this pilot project has significantly influenced the University of Leeds' approach to reverse mentoring at an institutional level. And I have been supporting our educational engagement team, who are a central team in the university, with a reverse mentoring scheme involving our most senior members of leadership. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's just again to emphasize how these relatively small, this project was 8 students and 8 members of staff, relatively small kind of grassroots projects can then have that ripple wave effect and inform and enhance practice at institutional level. So my reflections on doing that pilot project where, yes, reverse mentoring is good, we should do more of it. It's got a number of problems, of course, as with any kind of student experience type interventions, particularly when we're looking at issues around diversity and inclusion. But for me, the biggest problem with my pilot project was that I designed it. So the only thing I really did that brought student voice into it was I ran some focus groups with students, international students, and with staff who work a lot with international students to gather their thoughts about what are the issues on both sides, and this informed the themes of the meetings which the staff and students then had. But otherwise, everything was my decision as the researcher. So in this project then, what I'm going to talk about is phase 1 of a 3-year fellowship project. I'm currently at the end of phase 2, and next year is phase 3. So phase 1 involved the recruitment of a team of students who worked with me to co-design a reverse mentoring scheme. And the aim of the scheme is to explore how we can use principles of reverse mentoring and embed them into everyday practice. And the everyday practice that I was looking at was academic personal tutoring, as we call it at Leeds. You might call it other things within your institutions, but you hopefully know what I'm talking about when I use the phrase personal tutoring. I wonder, the design team was made up of 15 students who self-identified as underrepresented. So I wonder, again, with a bit of a show of the hands, do people in the room, you all said in Daisy's presentation that you've been, most of you have been involved in partnership work. Do you actively centre underrepresented student voices and experiences in your partnership work? Yeah, a few hands, good. Yeah, okay. That was kind of one of my core aims in this project. So I've had lots of debates with people about the term underrepresented. I recently wrote something about challenging the term non-traditional, which I hear a lot. But then I've heard other perspectives from people who actually identify with the term non-traditional. So I appreciate it really is a minefield. And that's why I, in this project, chose the concept of student asking this question: do you identify as underrepresented? And I didn't say what that meant. I didn't say because you fit within one of these university or higher education labels that we think are underrepresented, but just, do you identify as underrepresented? And I told them, as I did with you at the beginning, why I feel underrepresented in academia and did as a student. So these are just some of the examples. This team of 15 students that I recruited from across disciplines, so it's a cross-university project, and amongst those 15 students, there were 12 different disciplines represented. I've got loads of pages of this in one application form, how these 15 students talked about why they feel underrepresented. And you'll see, I know you won't be able to look at all of these, but at a quick glance, you might recognise that a lot of this language is quite deficit in its terminology. I wouldn't say that these students at the start of this project viewed themselves as very resilient, as very capable. They saw their underrepresentation as quite a negative thing in their lives. So that was a big thing for me to think about how I could challenge that through the co-design experience. So briefly, what did we do? Well, we only worked together for a period of about 10 weeks. This was in 2021-22, my first year of my fellowship project. The students worked for 3 hours a week, and I gave them, so this was co-design, not co-creation, because we were doing reverse mentoring. That kind of wasn't up for debate. Again, maybe in the future, my next project, that will be up for debate, but I felt like reverse mentoring had some more legs in it to explore. So it was co-design in that I gave them this skeleton framework of reverse mentoring, and then they worked together and with me to, I guess, put the flesh on that skeleton. To, not a very nice picture, but you get what I mean, hopefully. So I broke the students down into 5 sub-teams of 3 who they worked very closely with each week, but we then had beginning, mid and end point and opportunities in between those points actually to come together as a wider group for sub-teams to, for example, here when they were thinking about how, when we do the reverse mentoring, how are we going to collect feedback and experience from our mentors and mentees, and they designed those feedback methods, and then the next week they piloted it with another sub-team or 2, so they kind of acted as like critical friends to one another. Then throughout the project, they had, I don't know if anyone in your institutions or in your experiences have used PebblePad. It's like an online reflection portfolio. We use it at Leeds for personal tutoring, but it got introduced during the pandemic, and so uptake has been challenging. So I wanted to use it on this project to try and get staff and students a bit more engaged with it, because I think it actually does have a lot of good potential. But obviously with everything else going on, adding a new technology into the mix is always going to be a challenge. So again, I wanted to use something that staff and students have maybe come across before, but maybe needed a bit of more experience of using. So they had this weekly reflection to do about their experiences of being part of the co-design team, and also within that workbook they reported on their kind of findings for each part of the project, what they wanted it to look like. And this was just based on a pretty basic reflective cycle. I've written something, oh, that did a lot of skipping. I've written something recently that is coming out in the RAISE journal, hopefully at the end of this month. I always forget the title of it, something like the Journal of Educational Innovation, and yeah, sorry RAISE, but I always forget, it's a really long title. But that is about how this project intentionally sought to enhance the well-being of these 15 students, and to sought also to change their perspective about their sense of underrepresentation. So again, I'll ask you all a question. In your student partnership work, do you feel that you prioritise the well-being and the experience of your student partners over and above the outputs that you are trying to create with them? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so I think that was one hand. Okay, so and this isn't me saying, oh well, I'm great because I do that. Like, no, this was something again that has come through the projects that I've done and kind of led up to this learning from my own experience of thinking, actually, this is something that I should focus on more, particularly because my work does centre around underrepresented students, and there are lots of issues around using underrepresented student voices in research for our own benefit, the emotional labour attached to that, you know, lots trauma potentially, so lots of issues around that that make, for me, the facilitating of well-being particularly important. So I've got a paper coming out on that, so for time I won't say much more about that, but I can hopefully share it with you once it's released. And then at the end of the research period, inspired by Emma Heron's listening rooms work, I paired the students together and they had these kind of private conversations. So I put them in a Teams room, made sure everything was working, I had the sound on, and then I left. And they, between themselves, discussed a series of prompts about their experiences of being part of this project. So I'm very conscious that I've got very little time. These slides, I think, will be made available. These are just some of the things that the students talked about. So hopefully, if you're interested and you want to know more, you can look at those. There was a real sense, going back to kind of the first talk this morning, about students kind of expanding their tribes. Because, as I said, these students were from 12 different disciplines. None of them had met each other before. I think this approach really tackled the kind of individualism of identity characteristics that we can often see when we rely on university and higher education labels. So this shared sense of just underrepresentation in so many different ways actually allowed them to create this really strong bond. You know, they talked about having each other's backs, becoming friends. You know, we now hang out with each other. Again, kind of demonstrating how the project has lasted beyond the research period. They had this sense of belonging because of that, both to the project but also to one another, because this project was all about designing a scheme which has ran this year, which is designed to enhance the experiences of other underrepresented students. So they felt very connected to that, but likewise they also felt very connected to one another, because actually they got to say, there are other people that feel like I do, even though they look different to me, even though they experience life differently to me. You know, you feel like you're invisible, there's nobody like you, but actually we all could relate in some sense. Lots of themes around self-confidence, again, challenging that deficit narrative around being underrepresented and what that means. Actually, they loved that being underrepresented got them onto this project and that they got so many benefits out of it. It allowed me to grow, it allowed me to make impact, it allowed me to face challenges and learn that I can overcome them. And again, they also got a lot out of the idea that they were doing something that was going to have a bigger effect. You know, that's kind of snowball these 15 students and then 38 participants in the reverse mentoring this year. And then with the results of that reverse mentoring, there will be more staff and students involved in the project. So they talked about having this sense of pride, doing something bigger than us, doing something that feels important. And that empowered them a lot. It made them feel like they put their mark on something at the university, and really importantly, lots of reflections about, I don't feel as ashamed or self-conscious about who I am anymore, because they had used it for something really positive in this project. So a lot of these closing reflections I've already talked about, so in the interest of time, I won't say any more, other than I would really encourage you in your own work to think about how you facilitate the bringing together of underrepresented identities, how you facilitate a focus on the well-being and experience of your student partners, as opposed to always focusing on the outputs. Of course, at the end of this scheme, I wanted to have a reverse mentoring project, and thankfully I got that. You know, we created that together, and it's ran this year, and it's been super successful, and hopefully I can come back next time and talk about that. But really, for me, the central part of this project has been what these student partners got out of it, and I feel very grateful that I got to be part of that project with them. So thank you for listening. And yeah, have we got time for questions?
Okay, we're going to try, thank you very much, that was brilliant, but I'm going to move really fast on to questions. And what I'd like to do first, because we've not got very much time, and you can ask them questions in the break, are there any questions online to come to? So can we take that one first?
This is a question for Daisy, actually. Daisy, how do you break down barriers created by perceptions of student apathy and the idea that far from being experts in their learning, students don't know enough to be able to contribute effectively, and then therefore we perpetuate the we know best approach from staff? Does that make sense? Okay, so how do you break down the barriers? So if students are apathetic, how do you break down the barriers that perception creates? and therefore staff continue to take the we know best approach.
If I'm not mistaken, they are asking about how staff can continue to support the partnership if students are facing the barriers. So this is actually related to kind of another data set I have in terms of how students and the staff think about the partnership and how they conduct the partnership during their projects. So this part, I'm still working on that, but I would like to share part of the findings I had currently. So students are basically the biggest challenge that students are facing is like the foundation of a partnership that staff members are setting at the beginning of the project. So many of them are talking about, okay, so especially for the co-creating the ideas at the beginning of the project. So many students who are specifying that they have a little perception or little feeling of being a partner is they are not included in the idea stage. So they are more likely to be recruited by the staff member instead of co-creating the ideas at the beginning of the stage. So some staff, they are trying to break down these barriers for students. So they will set up the initial meeting and have a very open and kind of open conversation with the students, saying something like, okay, I know this project was initiated by me, but we would like to share the responsibility and ownership with you because you are partner with me. You have unique expertise in this process. So this is a way to give students or kind of so offer the students the power of being equal with the staff members. So I think this is the biggest challenge for students at the initial stage. But there are also some challenges at different stages, like middle stage and end stage. So my research also focuses on the longitudinal development of perspectives from students and staff. So hopefully I can share more findings in terms of students' barriers and staff barriers in September if you are going to raise conference.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Daisy. And some of that really chimed with what you were saying around involving actually at the design stage and stuff as well. So I'll take another question, but can we have it for Rach? Is it a question for Rachel? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Jenny from Edinburgh Napier. I work in student experience. That was an excellent presentation. I have to confess, I've never heard of reverse mentoring, and I work closely in peer support, so I'm a little bit mortified. Never heard of it, but sounds really interesting. I'm particularly interested, Rachel, in the way you went about recruiting underrepresented students. So I've done something similar in the past, but I actually had a list of LGBTQ, first and family, single parent. I kind of identified a list of students. I love that you actually allowed the students to determine that they, in fact, felt underrepresented. I would like to know how your means of recruitment. Was it email, posters? What did you do?
If you want to know more about reverse mentoring, I'd love to talk to you about it. Yeah, so the recruitment was all sorts of things, really. Yeah, email, I did posters, I got the project into every single newsletter around the university that I could possibly get it into, because a really key aim of the project was to challenge what underrepresentation might mean and look like. And to do that, I needed to get this opportunity, I guess, even though I only had, well, I was supposed to have a team of 10 and I ended up with 15. because I had like 60 applications. That was incredibly difficult to decide on. But yeah, I relied a lot on the relationships that I've got with colleagues and with students across campus to share this. And I really tried to encourage, so for example, we have this personal tutoring network, and each school at Leeds has got a personal tutoring lead, which is me in law. I relied on them to kind of disseminate the emails and the posters and things for me, and then things like the student union, counselling service, disability services, the chaplaincy, like putting the posters in all sorts of those places where, not exclusively, but more students who feel underrepresented might be likely to go. I shared it a lot on social media. Like, I don't think I did anything particularly like unusual or unique, but I really persisted. Like, I got it out in as many avenues and with as many people as I possibly could. And yeah, I think that using that kind of self-identify as underrepresented was really critical, because I got so for example, one member of the team is an ex-offender and has spent a significant amount of their life in prison and is now studying. And so for example, they wouldn't have identified, I don't think, within any preset labels that the university uses in its sort of access strategy to sort of signify underrepresentation. So yeah, I think that was really important. And again, like, talks to sort of the authenticity of the project. Like, there are obviously issues with people doing research about other people where they don't share identity characteristics. I completely respect and understand that. But I think the sort of self-identify as underrepresentation point allowed a lot of the students feedback that they saw that authenticity sort of from the beginning. Like, this feels different. This doesn't feel like a university project. It feels like actually there's someone behind this who really cares, and I want to get involved with that because I care too. Kind of approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you ever so much. If everyone can, we've no more time for questions, but I'm sure Daisy and Rachel will be happy to answer any over lunch. So if we could all show our appreciation for those really interesting